Welcome back to another episode of Time for Change Kitchen. I'm Danielle Bissoni. Today we are going to make vegan calzones, and we'll be doing these recipes in incremental videos so that you can see them step by step, or you can use them separately if you prefer to use them for different purposes, such as making the dough, which can be used as burger buns. It can be used for pita bread, and it can be used for pizza dough, and then we'll be doing vegan cheeses, and we'll be making a sauce, and so we'll have a lot of videos coming up for this recipe, which is not to imply that this recipe is difficult. It's really quite easy, and so we'll just get started, and you'll see for yourself. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take 13.5 ounces of warm water and add it to our mixing bowl. And to that we are going to add a teaspoon of sugar. And this will help to activate the yeast. And we'll mix that together with our little Danish dough whisk. I cannot impress upon you how useful this whisk is. You can find links to this product on my website, timeforchangekitchen.com. And to this we're going to add yeast. And this is Fleischmann's Active Dry Yeast. There are other brands that I'm sure that are fine, but this is convenient for me. It comes in a convenient packet, and so this is what I like to use. And so we're going to mix this in a little bit. You don't have to get too aggressive with it. You just want to make sure that all of your yeast is wet. And so we have to just wait for usually about 3 minutes. If this does not activate within 10 minutes, then your yeast is probably dead, and you have to throw it out and start over again with fresh yeast. Okay, so we'll just wait, and you can see this as it activates. At this point, while the dough is proofing, preheat the oven to 400 degrees. Okay, so this is my favorite part of making bread, is watching this yeast activate. It's kind of like magic. So now we can see that the yeast is active, and before we forget, we need to add our salt. This is 1 teaspoon of salt, and while I'm not a big fan of adding salt when you're cooking with bread, you pretty much have to, or you'll end up with something that is very bland and tastes rather like one would think cardboard would taste. To this, we're going to add 255 grams, or about 2 cups, of whole wheat pastry flour. I use half and half of pastry flour and all-purpose. You can use all-purpose or unbleached bread flour. I use only organic, and the reason I add the all-purpose flour to this dish is because we have to stretch the dough and fold it over, and the 100% whole grain flour tends to not be as flexible, and so you end up with a lot of holes in your calzone. So I find it comes out better if you do a half and half mixture of all-purpose flour and whole wheat pastry flour. This is about 2 1/4 cups, which is a very good reason to weigh this, because this is a fluffier flour. So even though it's the same weight as the pastry flour, has a little bit more in volume. So weighing flour will give you a very good accurate measurement, as opposed to just measuring it by volume. So we'll mix this up as far as we can with our Danish dough whisk, which is, I love this whisk, and it's useful for all sorts of bread applications and heavy doughs and batters, like pancake batters. Okay, So that's about as good as we're going to get here. And so we'll just knead this a little bit. And a little bit will stick to your hand, and that's fine. I had my sous chef bring me a little extra flour to dust this with so it wouldn't stick so badly. This batter was slightly wet, and you'll run across that periodically. But as you can see, we didn't have to add much at all. You want it wet enough to where it wants to stick to your hand, but it can't. See, that's trying to stick a little more, so I'm going to add just a slight bit more. And it doesn't require a lot of kneading. And we're going to let this double in size, and then we'll make our calzones. So this is not something that has to rise, be punched down and rise again, or shaped. We just, all we have to do is let this rise one time. Okay, so that's good. And I'm going to cover this. I've got a little plate that I'll use for this. And we'll be back after this is risen, which will take about 30 minutes. Oh, and by the way, I like to put it on a seedling mat. This is a mat that is designed for germinating seeds. But I find it perfect for proofing dough because it keeps the dough at about 20 degrees above ambient temperature. And since all my surfaces are granite, I have a hard time getting dough to rise. So this is a very useful tool to have in your kitchen. Okay, we'll be back in 30 minutes. Okay, so it's time to assemble the calzone. We have the dipping sauce on the stove simmering and thickening as it simmers, and that's just what we want. And now we are going to assemble the calzones. This has risen a little more than I normally would allow it to, but it's fine. It just took a little longer to do the other videos, so I'm running a little bit behind, but this is fine. This will work beautifully. And so what we're going to do first is weigh this, because we're going to divide it into four calzones. So this is 892 grams. Okay, so this will be 223 grams each. I'm going to put a little flour on my hand so that it doesn't stick so much. I can't tell you how important it is when you're working with bread and you want to have even sizes to use a scale. It just makes life so much easier. It's 199, 219, 223. So that's one. Okay, so now we have these measured into 4 pieces, and we're going to roll them out and fill them. Now I like to use this little chopping board. I should have shown it to you before I covered it up, This is a beat up old chopping board I've had since I was in college, and I just love it. I think I got it for free with a Book of the Month Club subscription. But it's been a great little chopping board, and I like using it for calzones because it keeps me from making them too big. Because without some sort of guide like this, I tend to get carried away, and I make these things huge. And so this allows me to make them a perfect size. So all you do is roll it, keep turning and rolling, keep going in a different direction. And it's a little bit hard to keep it from coming back because it's very elastic. And one of the things you can do is just to allow it to rest, and then it'll be more easy to hold in place. But this is fine. Okay, so now that that's ready, the first thing we'll do is put on our ricotta cheese. And what we'll do is we'll divide this in half and cover it with this vegan ricotta cheese. And I have made a video on this, so you should. It's very simple to make. It takes about 5 minutes, and it's very, very nice in this recipe. And you can put as much or as little as you want. I like to cover it pretty well. Okay. So, and the next thing I like to put is fresh spinach. I'm doing this a bit differently today. Usually I steam the spinach in advance, which allows me to use a greater quantity of greens and adds significantly to the flavor of the calzone. Then I just wring out the excess moisture inside a clean cloth. I forgot to do that, so instead we're using raw spinach, which is perfectly okay. Another thing is that I like to put my vegetables and my fruit on a clean towel to absorb some of the excess moisture. So the next thing I'd like to put on here are some grilled vegetables. This is onion and colorful little little peppers. They're not bell peppers, but colorful little peppers. I stuff these calzones as full as I can get them because they're so delicious. And then I just start adding vegetables. We'll put some mushrooms on, and you can put whatever vegetables you like. These are the ones that I tend to put on here because I really like them. And some black olives. Some artichoke hearts. And some pineapple. The pineapple gives us a lovely flavor, a lovely little unexpected sweetness. And I also have some vegan sausage here. I took a whole sausage and cut it cut it lengthwise down the middle, and then cut it across to make these little half moons. And it doesn't take much to give it a lot of flavor. Okay, and finally, I'm going to add the mozzarella cheese that we just made. And just a few little dollops of that is all you need. Ah. Okay. And so the next thing we do is we're going to pull this top over. And we're going to press it to the ends. When we put this on here, we left some of the dough exposed on the bottom so that we could press the top together. And the simplest way to do this is just take a fork and crimp it together, and it makes it hold very well. This is a very nice dough for making calzones because it's flexible and it doesn't want to break when you try to fold it over. If you use 100% whole grain, it tends to be a weaker dough, and it isn't as flexible, and you tend to get little tears in it, and it's not as nice a calzone. Things will ooze out of those tears, and it's just not nearly as pretty. Now we're going to transfer this to the oven and put it in for 12 to 15 minutes and at 400 degrees, and I'm using a convection oven, but if you're using a regular baking oven, that's fine. Okay, so let me move this to the oven and do another one. I like to cook two at a time, and I have them on a baking stone in the oven. Just so you know, this stone is clean. It has been stained by years of vegan cheeses and sauces oozing out of calzones and from pizzas. Eventually, the stone will become nearly black with use. Slide the calzone from the board directly onto the hot stone. Set the timer to 15 minutes. Depending on your oven, it will take 13 to 15 minutes to complete baking. Quickly prepare the second calzone. Slide the first calzone over and transfer the second onto the stone. Make a note of the time and calculate the time you should remove the second calzone. The alarm will tell you when to remove the first. Note that the first calzone doesn't look very brown when inside the oven. Remove it and you'll see it is browner once you've taken it out and plated it. Push the second calzone aside to make room for the third. We are making a total of 4 in just the same way. I slightly undercooked the last 2 calzones intentionally and allowed them to cool. Then I put them on a parchment paper covered baking sheet and froze them before transferring them to a gallon-sized freezer bag. I'll reheat them at a later date for another great meal. Transfer the dipping sauce to a small bowl and serve. So there you have it, delicious, hearty, and healthy calzones to enjoy now and extras to freeze for later. I'm Danielle Bassoni, serving up whole foods for whole health.